The morning I walked out of my house and found an empty space where my truck had been, I did not panic. I did not call the police. I did not run to my neighbors asking if anyone had seen anything. I stood on the sidewalk in the early morning light with my coffee, and I looked at the empty space, and I thought about what I knew and what I needed to find out, and what I was going to do about it. That is how I approach most problems. Calmly, sequentially, completely. It is how I built my business, and it is how I eventually parked 12 food trucks on a public street outside Linda Fracier's living room window and watched her call the city about it 4 times without result, because everything I did was entirely, perfectly, legally correct. My name is Danny Reyes. I am 41 years old and I own a food truck business called Reyes Street Kitchen that operates in the Nashville, Tennessee area. I started with one truck 8 years ago, a converted step van that I spent 4 months building out in my driveway because I could not afford to have it done professionally, and I had enough mechanical and carpentry ability to do it myself. That first truck ran 7 days a week for 2 years, me behind the window every service, my wife Rosa handling orders and the register. By year 3 we had 2 trucks. By year 6 we had 7. At the time of this story we had 11 trucks in the fleet, a commissary kitchen that we used for prep and storage, and a small booking and events business that placed our trucks at corporate events, festivals, and private parties across Middle Tennessee. I tell you the scale of the business because it is relevant to what happened and to what I did about it. I live in Creekside Commons, a residential neighborhood in Brentwood, Tennessee, about 20 minutes from Nashville. I bought my house there 5 years ago because the neighborhood was quiet, the lots were a good size, and I had done well enough by that point to afford something that felt like arriving. My house has a 3-car garage and a long driveway, and I had used that driveway for years to store my personal vehicles, my work truck, and occasionally, when one of the fleet trucks needed overnight maintenance or was waiting for a repair part, a food truck. The food trucks are commercial vehicles. They are licensed, insured, permitted, and inspected. They are also unmistakably what they are: large converted vehicles with wrap graphics and service windows, and the general visual presence of something that has a job to do. When one was parked in my driveway, it was visible from the street, and it was visible to my neighbor across, and 2 doors down, Linda Fracier, who had been the Creekside Commons HOA president for 8 years, and who had a particular relationship with my driveway that began approximately 3 months after I moved in and never improved. Linda was 64, widowed, with the specific quality of attention that some retired people develop when the management of their immediate environment becomes their primary project. She was not a lazy woman or a stupid one. She was organized and persistent, and she had spent 8 years building a detailed working knowledge of the Creekside Commons community standards, which she applied with the thoroughness of someone who believed that thoroughness was its own virtue regardless of the proportionality of the outcome. Her first notice to me was about the food truck, which I had parked in my driveway overnight while it waited for a hood vent repair. The notice cited Section 11 of the Community Standards, which covered commercial vehicles. The relevant provision said that commercial vehicles were not permitted to be parked in driveways or on streets within the community overnight. I had known about this provision. I had read it before I bought the house. I understood it to apply to the kind of ongoing commercial vehicle parking that turns a residential driveway into a commercial staging area, not to an occasional overnight when a vehicle needed maintenance. I went back to the text of Section 11 carefully. The provision said commercial vehicles could not be parked overnight in driveways or on community streets. It did not define commercial vehicles with much precision. My food truck was obviously commercial. I had no argument about that, but I also had a reasonable position that an occasional overnight, not a permanent or regular parking situation, was different in kind from what the rule was designed to prevent. I went to the HOA meeting and raised this interpretation. Linda's response was that the rule said overnight and overnight meant overnight, and my interpretation was not how the rule had ever been applied. 2 other board members nodded along. I asked if there were other homeowners who occasionally parked commercial vehicles in their driveways overnight. Linda said that was not relevant to my situation. I paid the fine for that first notice, which was $75, because I had in fact had the truck there overnight, and I decided paying it was simpler than fighting it while I had a business to run. That was a mistake, not because of the $75, which was not the issue, because paying it told Linda that the process worked and that I would comply, which told her to continue using the process whenever she saw my truck. Over the next 2 years, Linda sent me 9 notices. All of them were about the food trucks. Anytime a fleet truck was in my driveway overnight for maintenance, she noticed and she filed. My fines accumulated. My relationship with the community standards process deteriorated into something I was spending real time and energy managing. I talked to my attorney, a man named James Whitfield, different James from the bulldozer story. This is Tennessee, but a different part and a different attorney about the pattern. James looked at the notices and the fines and the community standards and said my interpretation argument about occasional versus regular overnight parking was reasonable, but had not been tested, that testing it would require a formal appeal that Linda would fight, and that even if I won the interpretive argument, the rule as written could be amended to close the gap. He suggested I look at the bigger picture of whether there was a path to a different outcome than playing violation defense indefinitely. I thought about that, and then I thought about something I had noticed about Section 11 that I had not yet explored fully. Section 11 covered parking of commercial vehicles in driveways and on community streets. It was specific about those 2 locations. My driveway, as a private property element within the community, fell under that provision. The community streets within Creekside Commons, which were private streets maintained by the HOA, also fell under that provision. What Section 11 did not cover, what it said nothing about at all, was the public street. Creekside Commons was accessible from a county road. The entrance to the neighborhood was off that county road. Along that county road, adjacent to the neighborhood entrance, there was a stretch of public right-of-way where parking was permitted under county regulations. The public street was not a community street. It was county road. Section 11 had no jurisdiction over county road. I had parked my truck on my own driveway and on community streets, both of which Section 11 covered. I had not, yet, tested what happened when a food truck parked on the public street just outside the neighborhood. I called the Williamson County Highway Department and asked about parking regulations on the county road section adjacent to Creekside Commons. The person I spoke with confirmed that the shoulder of the road at that location was not a no-parking zone. The parking was permitted in that area as long as vehicles were clear of the travel lanes and the shoulder was sufficiently wide, which it was. Commercial vehicles were subject to the same parking rules as other vehicles. There was no time limit in that section. Permitted parking, public road, no HOA jurisdiction. I noted this information and I filed it away. The thing that triggered what happened next was not a food truck notice. It was something smaller and in some ways more insulting. Linda sent me a violation notice about my driveway edging. The edging along the border of my driveway and the lawn had grown slightly ragged during a 2-week stretch when I had been managing a catering event that ran 7 days and left me with no time for yard work. The notice was accurate. The edging was overdue. It was also, at that particular moment, one notice too many. I corrected the edging, I paid the fine, and I called Rosa and told her what I was planning. Rosa listened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How many trucks?" I said, "All of them." She said, "You're going to park all 11 trucks on the county road." I said, 12. I am going to borrow one from a friend." She said, "This is going to be a whole thing." I said, "Yes, it is." She said, "Okay, tell me the schedule." Here is what I planned. I had a legitimate operational reason to stage food trucks near my house occasionally. The commissary kitchen was 20 minutes away, and when multiple trucks needed to deploy in the morning for a large event, staging them closer the night before reduced drive time and logistics complexity. I had an event coming up, a corporate catering contract for a tech company's annual outdoor gathering, a big one, 180 people, requiring 4 trucks simultaneously. That was a real event with a real operational need to stage trucks the night before. But I was not going to stage 4 trucks. I was going to call every food truck operator I knew in the Nashville area, explain that I had a public parking location adjacent to a neighborhood where the HOA had been harassing food truck operators, and ask if they wanted to park there for a night in solidarity and free publicity. Food truck operators are a community. We know each other, we help each other, we share commissary space and event leads and equipment loans. When I put out the call, I had responses within 2 hours. By the end of the day, I had commitments from 11 additional operators. 12 trucks total, including mine. Every truck would be legally parked on the public county road, in the permitted parking area, during a period when my event staging provided a legitimate operational reason for mine to be there. The others were there voluntarily on public property, which required no reason at all. I confirmed the parking regulations one more time with the county. I drove the location and measured the shoulder width, and confirmed that 12 trucks could park in a line without obstructing traffic. I took photos of the location markers and the road signs to document that no parking provisions existed. I had James review my plan. He called it, in his precise attorney way, legally unimpeachable. Then he paused and said it was also quite something. I set the date for a Thursday night, staging for my Friday morning event. I told the other operators the location, the time, the plan. I sent each one a copy of the county parking regulations and the shoulder width measurements so they knew they were on solid ground. Several of them brought their own documentation instincts to the situation, which I appreciated. The night before, I drove past the location in my car to confirm the space. The county road ran directly past the entrance to Creekside Commons. The entrance to the neighborhood, with its brick columns and its Creekside Commons sign, was visible from the parking area. Linda Fracier's house was the fourth house on the left from the entrance, close enough to the entrance road that from her front window she had a clear view of the county road. I went home. I had dinner with Rosa. I told her it was ready. She said, "This is either going to be very funny or a lot of work." I said, "Probably both." She smiled and said she had already cleared her Friday morning in case it was both. I parked my truck at 11 p.m. It was the first truck in the line. I parked it legally, wheels well clear of the travel lane, all running lights off, properly secured. I texted the other 11 operators that I was in position. By midnight, 12 food trucks were parked in a line on the county road adjacent to the entrance of Creekside Commons, their wrap graphics facing the neighborhood, their presence large and vivid, and entirely, legally, completely there. I went home and went to bed. I woke up at 5:45 to 17 text messages. Not from Rosa, not from the other operators. From Linda Fracier, who had apparently discovered the tracks sometime around 5 a.m., possibly because she was an early riser or possibly because someone had tipped her off, and who had sent me a series of messages that traced a clear emotional arc from authoritative to agitated to something that I can only describe as the written equivalent of a person packing a room. The first message, at 5:03, said, "Danny, there are commercial vehicles parked on the road outside our neighborhood. I assume some of these are yours. This is a violation of community standards, and I expect them to be moved immediately." The second message, at 5:22, said, "I have reviewed the community standards and commercial vehicle parking in this area is prohibited. I am asking you to move these vehicles before 6 a.m. The third message, at 5:38, said, "I have called the county non-emergency line to report these vehicles as potentially blocking traffic. An officer will be coming to assess the situation." The fourth message, at 5:44, said simply, "Danny." I looked at that last one for a moment. Just my name, the message of someone who has run out of the particular kind of words they usually use. I got dressed and drove to the location. The 12 trucks were exactly where we had parked them, in a clean line along the shoulder, their graphics facing the neighborhood entrance. In the early morning light, they were genuinely impressive. 12 food trucks from 12 different operators, 12 different designs and color schemes and menu boards, lined up on a county road like the world's most specific parade. A county sheriff's deputy was already there when I arrived. She was walking the line of trucks, checking clearances, looking at the shoulder. She had a clipboard. She looked up when I pulled in and parked behind the last truck. I introduced myself. I told her I operated the first truck in the line, that I was staging for a catering event the following morning, and that I had confirmed the parking regulations with the county highway department before staging. I showed her the documentation I had brought, including the highway department confirmation and the shoulder width measurements. She looked at the documentation. She walked the line again. She measured the travel lane clearance at 2 points with a tape measure she had on her belt. She came back and told me everything was within regulation, that the vehicles were legally parked, that there was no action she could take, and that the county had received a call about potential traffic obstruction, which her assessment had determined was not present. I thanked her. She left. At 6:15, Linda appeared at the neighborhood entrance. She was in a bathrobe, and she was holding her phone, and she looked at the 12 trucks, and then she looked at me standing next to my truck with my coffee, and she had the expression of someone who is doing mathematics in their head and arriving at an answer they do not like. She walked toward me. I waited. She said, "Danny, what is this?" I said, "These are food trucks, Linda. They're staging for an event tomorrow morning." She said, "You cannot do this. This is a violation." I said, "I have reviewed the county parking regulations. The vehicles are parked legally on a public county road. They are not in the HOA's jurisdiction. Section 11 of the Community Standards covers driveways and community streets. This is neither." She stared at me. I had been on the receiving end of Linda Frazier's stare for 5 years, and I had developed a comfortable relationship with it. It was the stare of someone accustomed to staring being sufficient. This time it was not sufficient. She said, "I'm calling the city." I said, "You can call the city. The county has already been here. The vehicles are legal." She went back inside. She called the city. I know because a city code enforcement officer arrived at 8:30 and conducted the same assessment the sheriff's deputy had conducted and reached the same conclusion. The vehicles were on a county road under county jurisdiction, and under county regulations, they were legally parked. City code enforcement had no authority over county road parking. The other truck operators had started arriving by 7:30 for their morning setups. 12 operators in various stages of morning prep, setting up their service windows, running through their ingredient checks, the general organized activity of people getting ready for a day of business. Several of them had set up small sandwich boards on the shoulder advertising their menus, which was permitted signage under county regulations, which I had specifically confirmed because I anticipated it would be a useful detail. By 8 a.m., something else had started happening that I had not specifically planned for, but that I had considered possible. People from the neighborhood, on their way out for their morning commute or their morning walk, had started stopping at the trucks. A couple of the operators had their windows open and were doing early sales, coffee and breakfast items to the morning traffic. By 9 a.m., there were 8 or 10 Creekside Commons residents standing in the shoulder of the county road, buying breakfast from food trucks that Linda had spent 8 years trying to keep out of the neighborhood. I watched this from beside my truck with a satisfaction that I am not going to pretend was incidental. I had not planned the sales. The operators had made their own decisions about whether to open for business, which was their right as independent businesses on public property. The residents had made their own decisions about whether to walk over and buy coffee and breakfast tacos, which was their right as hungry people in proximity to food. Linda called me 3 more times that day. I did not answer. I sent each call to voicemail and each voicemail to James, who listened to them and told me that the calls were agitated and repetitive, but contained nothing actionable and that I should continue not answering. My catering event ran beautifully on Friday morning. 4 of my trucks were on site at the corporate venue by 7:30. The other 8 borrowed trucks had departed their spots by mid-morning as their operators went about their days. My staging truck departed after I confirmed my event was running smoothly. By noon on Friday, the county road was clear. Linda sent me a formal violation notice from the HOA on Monday. It cited Section 11 and alleged that I had organized a commercial vehicle gathering adjacent to the community in a manner designed to harass and disturb residents. The notice demanded I acknowledge the violation and pay a fine of $250. I brought the notice to James. James read it and said the violation notice was on its face problematic because it cited Section 11, which covered community streets and driveways, and the parking had been on a county road. It also described the gathering as designed to harass, which was a characterization that could not be established, and which, if Linda pursued it formally, would require her to prove both intent and harm, neither of which she could do given that the parking was legal, the sales were legal, and the residents who bought breakfast had done so voluntarily. James sent a response letter explaining all of this and requesting that the violation notice be withdrawn. He also attached documentation of all 11 prior notices I had received over 5 years, the fines I had paid, and a formal statement that I intended to pursue a pattern of harassment claim against the HOA and against Linda personally if the notices continued without legitimate legal basis. The violation notice was withdrawn 2 weeks later without comment. Linda sent me no further notices after that. Not about food trucks, not about edging, not about anything. The silence was complete and immediate in the way of someone who has understood that a particular approach has stopped working and has decided to redirect their energy elsewhere rather than continue producing documentation that might be used against them. The HOA meeting the following month had a different quality than meetings I had attended before. 2 other homeowners raised issues about violation notices they believed had been issued without proper basis. Gary Cunningham, who lived 3 houses from me and who had been dealing with his own notice pattern about a carport he had built with all required permits, presented documentation of his situation. A woman named Priya Anand, whose landscaping choices had generated 4 notices in 2 years, brought her own file. The meeting ran 40 minutes longer than usual and ended with the board agreeing to form a compliance review committee with homeowner representation. Linda did not speak during the open floor period. She sat in her usual chair at the front of the room, and she was present, and she was quiet, and she had the look of someone recalibrating from a long distance. The Compliance Review Committee met twice and dismissed 9 open violation cases as either improperly issued or issued for issues that had already been resolved. Gary's carport case was among them. Priya's landscaping cases were among them. The committee also produced a clarifying amendment to Section 11 that defined commercial vehicle parking more precisely, distinguishing between regular commercial operations, staging, and occasional maintenance or operational needs, which was the interpretation I had raised 5 years earlier in my first meeting. I did not need the amendment. My trucks park at the commissary now, and the 1 or 2 times a year I need an overnight maintenance stop, I have arrangements with a commercial lot nearby. But the amendment matters for the next person. Rosa and I had 11 operators and their families over for a cookout at my house 2 months after all of this settled. We cooked in the backyard, trucks parked in the commissary where they belonged, nobody's driveway involved, just people who worked in food and knew what it took, and were glad for a Saturday afternoon that was not about a violation notice. One of the operators, a woman named Carmen, who ran the best Al Pasta truck in the county and who had been one of the first to answer my call for the overnight staging, raised her drink and said, to Danny, who parked 12 trucks on a public road and somehow made the whole neighborhood better. I said, I just parked where it was legal. Carmen said, that's all it ever takes. She was right, it is all it ever takes. Know the rules completely, find the space the rules do not cover, use that space precisely and legally and without apology, and let the outcome speak for itself. The county road outside Creekside Commons is quiet now. No trucks, no sandwich boards, no morning coffee line. Just a road doing what roads do. But I drive past it sometimes on my way to the commissary, and I think about 12 trucks in a line in the early morning light, and Linda in her bathrobe doing mathematics at the neighborhood entrance, and the deputy measuring the shoulder clearance, and the residents buying breakfast tacos at 8 a.m. because the opportunity was there and the food was good. It was, if I am honest, one of the better mornings of my professional life. Thumbnail text. 12 trucks outside her window, all 100% legal. SHETOWED truck, I brought 12 more. HOA TOWED, the wrong food truck owner.